everybody. Very good to see you here. Many people I know, not everybody, but it's lovely to see. I'm not going to say old faces. I know it is lovely to see people that I haven't seen for a while, and who we really appreciate being such great supporters of Centre for Access to Justice. So my job at the moment is to welcome you to this Access to Justice event, special event, on the future of social justice education. And as I said, it's great to see a lot of long-standing supporters of the centre. I was going to mention, is it somebody from the Legal Education Foundation? Apparently, oh, there is, right there. Right me up to it. So what I did want to say, I do pass on to Matt Spurn, say that an organisation that has consistently funded the Centre for Research and some of our policy activity in the Centre has been the Legal Education Foundation, and their funding has given has provided support for a lot of our work. I also want to say hello to Catherine Hanna, who's here from the Ministry of Justice. We've worked quite closely with the Ministry of Justice. We've had a very good relationship with them, and I think it's kind of been a mutually beneficial relationship, and it's very nice to see the NOJ here represented here, and also the partners of the centre, alumni, and students. I think no one here needs to be reminded of the faculty's commitment to access to justice, but as a reminder, I hope that everyone will take a chance to look at the exhibit outside, which I hadn't seen today, and it was astonishing to me to stand there and look at it. First of all, was it that long ago that we did that? Because everything seems like just a couple of years ago. But the number of things we've done, the range of activities we've done, we have been tremendously creative and innovative. And I think that is an absolute tribute to Rachel and the team, Rachel Shiva and the team in the Centre for Access to Justice, which is just a fantastic group of people. I should also mention, I have to mention, because I'm slightly overdressed this afternoon, that 2026, as well as being UCL200 anniversary, and I am Mrs. 200 anniversary in UCL, which means I got a lot of speechifying and overdressing during this year. 2026 is also the 10-year anniversary. It's 10 years since we set up our operation in East London. So the Centre for Access to Justice was founded, it was officially launched in 2013 or 12. It's 2013, because it's the implementation of Glasgow. I always kind of associate it with the implementation of Glasgow. So 2013 was when we founded the centre, but in 2016, we did what at the time seemed slightly mad, or it does in retrospect, slightly mad. We thought it'd be a great idea to do the kind of thing that they do in other places, and that has been going on, which is actually to have free social welfare legal advice services located in healthcare settings. Why did we do it? Because we all know from research and of course from practice the very, very close relationship between legal issues and health issues, bi-directional relationship. So having a legal problem will undoubtedly affect your health in one way or another, perhaps badly, perhaps not so badly, but very often it does have an impact. But the other thing, of course, is that merely becoming ill in itself creates issues for which the law provides a remedy in theory, as we know. So we set up this pilot service in East London in 2016, and we continued until the NHS very helpfully kept raising the rent so high that we had to leave. And UCL, this goes to show how Hans government bits and bobs joined up, and UCL very kindly provided us with proper premises in Stratford, and so we now have the ILAC clinic in Stratford, which still takes referrals from GP practices, but also other places as well. So the work of CAJ, dating back to 2013, is entirely in keeping with UCL's founding principles of inclusive education, dissemination of useful knowledge, and commitment to societal benefit. And I think that's in our 200th anniversary at UCL, it's important to stress. The event is taking place in what seems to me to be a continuing but escalating sense of worry about the future of access to justice and the state of the sector. And I am so old that I feel as if I am this kind of continual Groundhog Day on access to justice. But I mean, people keep saying, actually, it's bad. It hasn't been as bad as it's got bad. And actually, it seems to be continually getting bad. And you think you've seen it all before, but actually you haven't. And you've seen things we're seeing things that we've never seen before. And that's what makes it very worrying indeed. So we're used to constraints on funding. But as we know, funding is constrained absolutely everywhere. At the same time, we've got a professional landscape that's changed significantly. We've got changes in the routes to qualification with the introduction of the SQE. We also have increasing practical and financial barriers to accessing and sustaining social justice careers generally. And that is something that I have been aware of when we've been trying to recruit for the centre to get people to do things over the years. We also say, there's tons of people who want to do it, tons of people want to get involved as a career. And I think that is very much less the case, and people talk about it, it's less the case it used to be. So the issue of brain drain is a concern in the profession, and it's time to think hard about the role that universities can play in addressing this and the wider benefits of our work and how it could improve access to justice. There's a need to galvanise young people into the sector. I'm sure other people will agree with that, to ensure that we're able to help people in need to access the critical services and benefits to which they are legally entitled. And as we know, you judge a society not by the rights that it ostensibly gives, but by what can be enforced, what's acceptable and what can be enforced. And so these challenges raise questions about what social justice education should look like and what role universities can play in shaping the next generation of legal practitioners. And I think we are at a time, a particular time when universities are under challenge in terms of their social community benefit, the civic benefit of universities. And I think a lot of what we do makes a very, very tangible contribution to that. And it's something that we need to continue to do, but to see how we can build on it. And I think UCL is doing things to address these issues. First of all, access to justice is a formal faculty strategic priority. And in faculty like faculty of law, that is important, that it is a strategic priority. And that was not the case 10 or 15 years ago. People were very sympathetic to, oh yes, that's just people are very nice. But it is actually a strategic priority. And we're highlighting this institutionally in the wider political context in which people are questioning the benefits of our university. So the university as a whole is under the spotlight to some extent, and actually what we do is a very good news story. We're now teaching social welfare law and access to justice. I think I see social welfare law lecturer there. Our flagship clinical education programme, including a placement at UCL ILAC. We continue with that. Pro bono opportunities for students, which we've been doing for years before the centre was actually founded. We have paid internships in holidays for those who can't afford to volunteer. Training new solicitors to qualify. 2 have qualified so far, and 1 is halfway through. Where's our halfway through? We do mentorship and shadowing schemes, career information and events. So we've been thinking hard and continuing to develop our work. Our hope for this evening is that the discussion will spark conversations that flow across the sector. So as always, we want to be involved in leading the sector, doing innovative things that others can't do or that others aren't yet doing. I firmly believe that the activities of CAJ have provided tangible benefits to the community, enrich the learning of our students, helping them to understand the transformative power of the law in the lives of people blighted by challenges who need advice and support in improving their material and physical well-being. And sometimes the law is all that people have, they don't know it. And that's where we have a very important part to play. I think the CAJ has shown what universities and law students can do. I think there's always more one can do. And I hope that this evening we can think that through a little more in a bit of detail. We've got a fantastic group of speakers, and I'll hand over now to Rachel Knowles, who's the Director of the Youth Centre for Practice Justice, is going to introduce the panel and keep it going. So thank you very much. I'll give that back to you. And I'm afraid that I have to go on and do something elsewhere. So I'm going to stay for as long as I can, but I'm going to sit to the back so that I can slip out without falling over something. Anyway, thank you very much. Enjoy the evening. I hope.
And people feel as I teach. So yes, I'm Rachel. I'm the director of the Centre for Access to Justice. I am here primarily just to introduce our panel speakers and to be Mrs. Clockwatcher. I'm really quite excited about this panel. We've got a special UCL connection this evening, either everyone, either an alumni or current student or a former employee of UCL. It's very much a family affair, and it's all back together on the very first year. So we have first of all the lovely Jennifer Kingham, who is Professor of Law at Social Change at Glasgow and co-director of the Glasgow Open Justice Centre and the Law Clinic. She's also the founder of the Centre for Justice and created our module, which is our legal education module that still runs pretty much almost exactly as she designed it a few years ago. So yes, her research addresses legal aid, social justice law, and social education will be a very touchable to speak. I'm going to introduce everybody so that I don't interrupt the flow of discussion once it gets going. And then we have Rohini Jamna. She's the Director of Policy and Parliamentary Affairs at LAPG. They also provide secretariat support for the APG on access to justice. She's a current UCL MBA candidate at the UCL's Institute for Innovation. I can't really remember, which is really good. I'm very excited to have you here to talk about the joys of legal practice. Then we have Sandy, who is, of course, most importantly, UCL alumna. One of my first students from when I first joined the UCL, so it makes me feel really old. She's a qualified solicitor who worked as a registrar at the Australian Administrative Appeals Chamber, and prior to this, she was a housing solicitor at the Maryland Law Clinic, Maryland Legal Centre, and she was also a recipient of the Justice First Fellowship from the Legal Education Foundation. So that's great. And then finally, last but not least, we have Michael Marshall, who is, of course, most importantly, the UCL alumnus. He is an English qualified solicitor at Law Centre now, but before this, he was at UCL and one of our first students at our first law clinic in 2016. He started in his first years and gradually worked his way into our hearts. And upon graduating, we hired him as a social welfare advisor, and then he was our first trainee solicitor, and then our first qualified solicitor, and he stayed on to take our students until we couldn't go with him, and then he moved to Scotland which seems to be a common theme amongst people who do this. So there we go. That's our challenge today. Thank you. This will be
It is so good to be here and back at UCL, and thank you, Rachel, for the warm welcome. It's such a pleasure to return, and it was such a pleasure to work here at such a formative stage in the establishment of the Centre for Access to Justice to help realise Hazel's vision for that centre and for establishing a programme of clinical legal education here in the Faculty of Laws. I wanted to begin this evening by also honouring a really inspirational colleague that I remember from that time, Professor William Twining, who sadly passed away just last October. I had the great pleasure of working with William on our programme for law teachers and also in another international programme together with Anna, who's in the room, Law Without Walls. And William was the most passionate and thoughtful scholar about legal education. And he said that in all Western societies, law schools are typically caught in a tug of war between three aspirations: to be accepted as full members of a community of higher learning, be relatively detached but nonetheless engaged critics and censors of law and society, and to be service institutions for a profession, which is itself caught between noble ideals, the lucrative service of powerful interests, and the unromantic cleaning up of society's messes. It's quite a tall order for legal education, isn't it, to do all of these things? And William dedicated his his life really, and a lot of his kind of legal philosophy to interrogating this notion. Many of you might know of his seminal work, Blackstone's Tower. And he had these ideal visions of the lawyer. On the one hand, the lawyer is Pericles, a philosopher, statesman, if you like. The lawyer is a wise judge, someone committed to public service and the social good. But we also have the ideal of the lawyer as a plumber, a technician. We need lawyers to use legal tools to resolve day-to-day problems, and they have to do that efficiently and be masters of their tools. And he said that the problem that legal education has is that there's a tension between these two ideals, and it's hard to reconcile them. And I don't know, Hazel, if you remember that back in 2011, we opened a debate in advance of the Legal Education and Training Review, and we realised slightly foolishly afterwards, we called it, "Do lawyers need to be scholars?" And I went into the depths of the internet to find some pictures of this event. And I don't think I'd anticipated how contested this would be. I recall, and since 2011, I hadn't been in legal education long. We had our colleagues, Richard Muirhead, Chris Richard Muirhead, who was still at Cardiff at the time. They had joined us at UCL, Fleet Sands, Mark Potter was on the panel. But we had comments from the audience, we had academics saying, "You lawyers need to stay away from legal education. We don't need you here. We just leave us to do our teaching and our research. Nothing to see here, go away." And lawyers in the audience and on the panel saying, "Why on earth can you disassociate your teaching from the practice of law? These two things are so inextricably linked. To try and divorce one from the other, it's never going to work." As an aside, Philippe Sands also made the very audacious comment that night that he thought the law degree was useless, we should abolish it, and we should do a bar exam style test for law. It ended up in the papers the next day. Hazel and I were beside ourselves. We thought it was the most radical, audacious thing, and of course, in a decade, that's exactly what happened with the SQE, and he was predicting the future all along. But I raised this, I suppose, to make the point that none of this is easy. It's difficult to reconcile, and I would argue that no more is it difficult in the area of social justice legal practice, that these two competing ideals really come into their own when we think of social justice lawyering. Please use this shameful plug for some of my books here. I was asked tonight to speak to some of my research, and that's because really when I look back on those early years at UCL, I was concerned by the lack of empirical evidence and theoretical engagement with what social justice lawyering is. And I suppose since then, through doctoral studies and later research combined with my work in clinical legal education, I really tried to plug that gap. And the key report I want to mention here is the Legal Aid Census 2021, which I'm going to speak to. It was commissioned by none other than Roe on the panel here. A Legal Aid practitioners group, UCL alum Katrina Denver worked with me on that, as well as Daniel Newman and Jess Mant. And the findings are publicly available in the report, as well as in the monograph Legal Aid in the Future of Access to Justice, which is an open access text. And it's the first comprehensive survey that we have of the legal aid workforce. It really seeks to better understand the challenges of practice across different issue areas, what would help sustain the sector, but importantly, the values and the motivations for lawyers on the ground. And it's quite interesting for me because that's a quantitative study, very much in Hazel's wheelhouse, about 2,000 respondents. That was new to me, first quantitative study I'd ever done, but of real interest to me that the findings really chimed with some of my earlier work, which is more qualitative and participatory. And in that work, Lawyers Networks and Progressive Social Change, what I found is that across different practice types, so whether social justice lawyers are working in legal aid law firms, at the independent bar, in law centres, charities or NGOs, they have a shared sense of collective purpose, a commitment to social justice and to collectively using tools to create change. And some of the theories that are introduced in that book, and that takes you onto the book over to the right here, which was just published last March, and it's the first ever textbook for students in clinical legal education. Rachel kindly contributed some reflections on legal aid practice to this book. But that really seeks to introduce students to, for example, theories like trauma-informed lawyering, movement lawyering, anti-racist lawyering. What do we know about those sociological theories? that can help us to understand the practice of social justice and of clinical legal education as well. That textbook is dedicated to the memory of William Twining, and I hope that he would be pleased to see us really try to reconcile both the skills of clinical legal education with what we also believe is really important underlying theory. The other thing to know about that is that the chapters exactly follow the modules on the access to justice and community engagement. But on to something a little bit less, not so positive, I'm afraid, and that's the findings from the legal aid census in relation to legal aid in legal education. And you can see here we surveyed more than 1,000 students about whether or not they'd been offered modules relevant to legal aid. For immigration, for example, only 11.7%, welfare benefits 9%. If we move down, we can see that only 3.2% of students had an offering of a course in education law, and the findings are largely similar, what we call the vocational or the vocational conversion stage. I think what's most concerning about these findings is that they align with what we know about advice deserts and droughts in legal aid, that the areas in England and Wales where we simply can't recruit enough practitioners, nor can we retain them, are very closely aligned here. Social welfare, housing, social care and education being areas where we're simply not training enough lawyers. We also asked students whether legal education prepared them for legal aid practice. Only about 13% agreed or strongly agreed with that notion. 70% were quite indifferent or disagreed. I think in thinking about the future of social justice education, it would be remiss not to discuss student debt, which is so important when we think about access to the profession, and also what I'm sure some of my colleagues might speak to this evening as well. The study, workforce census, gives a lot of information about salaries in legal aid, and suffice it to say they're insultingly low when compared to commercial legal practice. And when we bring together the high levels of student and increasing levels of student debt, that really is concerning. You can see the difference at £50,000 plus between students and current practitioners, so it's simply rising for current and prospective students. The other really interesting thing looking at this, I think, after a couple of years, is I remember we couldn't quite understand the I don't know figure. Like, how does 10% of a very large sample size here of more than 2,000 not know about their student debt? And of course, it's only in the last 12 months that the scandal of the student loans, the compounding interest, and the lack of transparency as to the levels of debt, particularly with the Plan 2 loans, has come to light. 30.5% are holding that debt in credit cards, 15.5% in student loans. So I suppose to finalise, it's a mixed picture. I think this quote summarises many of the quotes from the student legal aid census. The students say that they still feel that universities are angling them towards commercial or private law, that universities themselves will never push you into legal aid work or support you in that process. And of course, we know there are pockets of really positive activity. We've got more clinics and pro bono projects in UK universities than ever before. But what's interesting to us as researchers is that in a generalised sense, students still feel isolated in pursuing that path. They feel that they have to turn away to pursue legal aid or social justice legal practice because the norm is still very much something else. And I think it is incumbent on all of us in legal education, especially outside of subjects like social welfare, access to justice, human rights, to be quite careful about how we frame the importance of this work. And the best way to do that, of course, is the experiences of our own students who do take courses in clinical legal education, courses relevant to legal aid. I've just put some quotes up here, to Don and my quote from students from my doctoral study, many of them were at UCL, about their own experiences and how inspirational they found having the opportunity to be able to have exposure to legal aid practice. So I just conclude by saying that from researching this area, we know that the legal aid workforce is under severe pressure. It's chronically underfunded, and its sustainability is a major concern, and I'm sure others will speak to that. Yet we also know that despite these challenges, practitioners are some of the most highly motivated in the public sector and other sectors. They're motivated by public service, by problem vulnerable clients. And it's their commitment to clients, the legally intensive tells us, that keeps lawyers in the sector despite the comparatively poor financial rewards. I would argue that to meet the challenges of the future, legal education must continue to nurture lawyers who embody both Pericles and the plumber. Professionals capable of combining technical excellence, sound judgment, civic engagement, and a strong commitment to social justice. And I really hope that we'll be able to continue to teach students in this way, and that to do so, I think, will do a real justice to William Twyning's great legacy here at UCL and also elsewhere. Thank you. Both of you university 200 year and the online and I've been trying in months to think of what to say on an occasion like this. But I keep coming back to the same point. That UCL was founded 200 years ago for the goals and for the excluded, for the people that established universities of the day wouldn't admit. And its founders didn't gently widen participation or lobby existing universities. What they went out and did was build a whole new universe. In doing so, they changed the rules about who got to be educated in this country. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. UCL and how it used its position to bring about change. Hazel's already touched on that this evening as I was joking. But the question is now whether it can do something in the same order again, not for who gets to be educated, but for what they do with that education. I want to talk about three things this evening. How people find their way into social welfare law and to be paid, why fewer people are finding their way into it, and what institutions like UCL, like staff here and the students, can do about it. But I'm going to start with talking about my own route into this, because I think it matters to what I want to say next. 20 or so years ago, I wrote a book here at which feels like a staggering amount of time, to be honest with you, but I got my training contract in my second year, and I'm pre-qualified in and it's a path that many of your students are on, or encouraged to be on, and it's a really good path. I learned a huge amount from people that I respect and admire greatly. Fantastic training. But when I left UCL, I knew very little about leadership. I never really come across it. She's a line of things, the various career talks that I've had didn't expose me to it. So I knew there was a legal aid system out there, and I knew that there was a not-for-profit world out there, but I couldn't have told you what its working life looked like. And what changed for me was volunteering at a housing law charity in Woolwich. I volunteered hoping to be useful in a small way for a period of 2 months. But what I found instead, some brilliant lawyers and incredible caseworkers doing some of the most demanding, skilled legal work that I've ever come across. Often the clients have been turned away by every other part of the system before they walked through the door. There are these clients were often queuing around the corner in Woolwich to try and access this service. And through that, I sat in on possession hearings, interviewed clients, and watched colleagues holding cases together, clients together. And they all demonstrated the patience and empathy that was a world away of the law that I'd seen practice in the city. And that's kind of what Section 21 notice was, and what it actually does to a family. And I learned something of the chaos of the reality that so many people are now. Slowly, I came to understand that the work that I've been trained for all those years and the work that was most needed. Rachel mentioned earlier that I'm a director of policy. And as many people know, policy work it's not linear. It doesn't open doors with a smile or a twist of this. Often policy work doesn't work. Sorry, Catherine, I'm going to talk as a human advance. Often policy work doesn't work for years and years. Until the day that conditions are favourable, the right people are in post, the right messaging is got across, then you and
finally policy work does, but in social welfare law, you're making change in people's lives every single day. And I don't say any of this in a bid to change anyone's career paths. I say it because the route that I took, as simple as it was, is now much harder for the students sitting in this room and in this building to take. And that's why I want to centre on. Jackie referenced the work that we did on the Legal Aid Centre, and we also ran the Westminster Commission at the same time. Between them, various bodies of work, the inquiries that have been held, the independent work, civil service work, and it's almost the greatest picture of the legal aid systems in many ways. And the picture is painful. According to the Law Society, 42 million people in England and Wales live in areas where they don't have access to it. 50 million people don't have access to a welfare legal aid provider. 25 million don't have access to a housing legal aid provider. And there are just 10 firms across England and Wales that have a legal aid contract services for children with special education needs. And that's with something like 1.5 million children. Just to put that in perspective, the combined population of England and Wales is around 52 million. But we are talking about vast swathes of legal life welfare. Jackie's research has shown that law students have very few opportunities to take courses in social welfare law during their degrees. A lot of the courses that are offered may be optional modules for third years, and that's about the limited careers advice available for the not-for-profit sector. A huge amount of debt that she referred to, that graduates now carry, and we start reduction in funded training opportunities since 2010. With that condition for what we're seeing on the ground right now, low levels of new recruits, in some areas for several decades. And we're not talking about a sudden crisis here. It's a quiet, insidious crisis. A crisis that mostly affects poor and disenfranchised. And these crises are incredibly hard to get the public and to get government to pay attention to, especially in the economic situation. Both the Westminster Commission and the Legal Aid Centre showed us that low employment at the junior end tends to affect and fall hardest on mid-career lawyers who are still there, because there's no one coming back. The work has to go. These may have risen somewhat in the intervening years, but maybe haven't still reached the programme. I'm genuinely embarrassed. It's difficult to defend this career path to students. The newly qualified lawyer in the city out there more than 3 times the average experienced legal aid lawyer in the sector earns. A few years post-qualification, and that's not law. But we're also bright, brilliant young people, often the best people in their family to come into the law, to come to university, often carrying really significant debt. Make a choice that's not really a choice. Give up very reasonable things like buying a home, starting a family, living in London. When I talk to colleagues about housing, immigration, community care, welfare benefit, what they describe despite the disparity of practice areas is strikingly low pay, long hours, administrative load, unpaid work, vicarious trauma, a wider justice system which is in shambles, and is, in others, quietly turning into a recruitment family retention problem. And none of those things is a mystery. None of them is too long to fix it. But while we have good will and states in this sector, we really do people who are really committed to the work that they do. None of this can be fixed with goodwill by itself. All of these need to get fixed with money, by time, by legal policy, and by training groups that actually exist for people. Which brings me back to the universities, and back to this one in particular. So the first thing I want to talk about is the curriculum. There has always been, across legal education in England and Wales, as Jackie and Hazel mentioned, an emphasis on the corporate sector. You can see it in the mandatory modules in the first and second years. In the prospectuses, in the people careers fairs, and in the shape of the SQE itself, which has somehow managed to be designed without any meaningful content on social welfare. And I know that UCL and other universities are gradually changing this, but what we've done is build a qualifying route to the entire legal profession of England and Wales, which makes the law governing everyday things like housing, immigration, and benefits are totally optional. And that's a choice that's been made. And it's a choice that we can make differently. The second thing is careers advice. And this isn't down to any individual careers because the resourcing on the corporate side is vast. And the resourcing on the legal aid side, the social welfare side, isn't. But the effect is that students hear about one part of the profession in great detail. They get back to students provided They might do a vacation scheme. Everything's thrown at them, and it's incredibly enticing. And if they hear about social welfare law, it's like accident. That accident worked for me. It's not going to work at the scale the sector now needs. And the third thing, and the thing that I think that this room knows most about, is the clinic. Law clinics are not and cannot be a replacement for any publicly funded legal aid sector. And we should be careful not to let anyone pretend that they are. But the brilliance of the clinic, like UCL200 and UCL200, is it giving students the experience that I had at college, but during their career, during their degrees, rather than after it. I spoke to Rebecca Howell from Law Works last week. She's are now law clinics out in Wales, which is absolutely fabulous. If all those students introducing social welfare law, it's incredibly exciting. What's also really exciting was I remember when Rachel told Chris and I about the plans for the legal aid contract that they were going to have here, and now they have too. They make this work visible. They make these clients visible, and it makes the choice that these students make a real one, and that matters more than I can say. So my request on this, our 200th anniversary, is more smart, I think. Keep expanding the clinic. Rachel, Ian, Shiva, you are doing an incredible job. Keep teaching social welfare law as an undergraduate module, and not as some worthy footnote skipping through to the third year or postgrad. Keep giving your students the real practical experience that you've been giving them, and exposing them to the other forms of work through the pro bono clinics that you've been partnering with. Bring practitioners into the sector and into your lecture theatres as routinely and as profoundly as you bring partners into the city. Talk to students early and often about practice when it exists, that is intellectually serious. It's some of the most demanding lawyers that they will encounter, and there's a route into it that doesn't require them to choose between a training and a event. And I want to end where I began. UCL exists because a group of people in the 1820s looked at the institutions of the day and they decided that there needed to be a change in the way that education was delivered in this country, that it needed to reach those that are currently excluded. And in doing so, they shifted what the country thought was possible. The legal aid and social welfare law sector is, in a quiet way, doing work of exactly the same thing, the same kind. It exists for people, but the existing that people simply do the net. It is, in that sense, founded on the same impulse as the university, and it's now to the point where it needs UCL to do for access to justice, but they close towards it, what did for access to education. Not a gesture, change in the rules. Some of the students who have made that change are really still late. Some of them are hopefully in this room this evening. They need to be told that the work exists, that it matters, that it's worth doing, that there is a route into it for them. And that's the job of the profession, the policymakers, the legal education, and on a good day, for even sectors. UCL on its 200th birthday is a very good position. It was a call to arms in that one in the profession to come and tell you about this work, about legal aid practice, and to speak to people in this room. So that's what I'm going to do. That's what I've been asked to do. So my name is Terry. I'm currently a registrar at the Tribunal Administrative Appeals Chamber, but I didn't start there. I started, many of us did, as a UCL undergrad. I watched Bridget Jones probably about age 13 and heard Mr. Darcy say he was an international human rights person. Up to law school, let's go. And then I got there, it was a bit like, not much human rights in this. Lots of wine and cheese about corporate law. So interested or anything else for me. Twiddling my thumbs, feeling quite disillusioned, to be honest. Law degree, and generally sort of with what I wanted to do with my life, my career, because I knew I wanted to contribute to the community. That's a really important part of one of the core values, and to sort of contribute to the collective purpose of working together as well, that that legal aid lawyers have. Luckily for me, the access to justice and community education module had first year, I think, in 2013, and then 2014.
In my final year, I managed to get, I think you must be interviewed, I remember to be interviewed, I was an interview now, I'm not sure. Oh, yeah. And to prove that, you know, you really wanted to do this. So I got on the module, and that's where my spark was lit and my career began, really. So I did that course on it. I volunteered at Just for Kids Law, that hadn't been set up then, so otherwise I would have worked there, definitely. And saw that legal aid was a career path, was an option. Saw the amazing community care and education law work that they were doing there. And I learned that I could do that. Okay, it's not an international human rights barrister, but you know, I think I wanted something closer to home anyway. I wanted to be working with the people of my local community. I'm from London, South London. And it was really important that my career and my core values were sort of rolled up into one. So I did that module, I graduated, and when I sort of looked around, I was like, too much. And a lot of people I've spoken to said, well, you're going to have to paralegal, but quite okay at the legal aid law firm, and be on your way, really. So that's what it is. So I got a paralegaling job at TV Edwards doing social welfare law, so housing and community care, and just my world expanded. I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. I love it. It's litigious. You're helping people, you know, helping people obtain a home or retain their home if they're facing possession proceedings, helping people who are non-verbal, who need to have care needs, get that care from the local authority. And I really sort of found my groove. I hadn't known about that until I've done the access to justice community engagement course, and know that it's a career option, really. So I was paralegaling at TV Edwards, sort of muddying along for, and I don't know if the pay is the same, but it was sort of like, you know, £16,000 to £18,000 a year, which in reality is not sustainable for most people. I was living with my grandma, but you know, I thought this is the work that I want to do. So that's the sort of balance that I struck. And then I was attending the Lallies, the Legal Aid Lawyer of the Year Awards, when someone walked up to me. He's not in this room today, Matthew Smurden, head of the Legal Education Foundation. And luckily my boss was next to me, but he was like, we are trying to train this. Yeah, that's not good. So I applied and I got it. I mean, I don't know how, but there we are. And got training with the American Legal Centre, and it just happened that it's something I had experienced there. If you don't know about the JFF, what they do is they fund training contracts, and at the time pupilages, although they do anymore, in settings where they can't ordinarily afford to train people, law centres, NGOs, charities, advice centres, and not just London based, so across the UK, to try and focus on those advice deficits that exist, you know, so it's a really well cause, do amazing work. I applied and became a gentleman, a fellow, trained at my award and qualified, and started to do housing and public law. And when people say housing law, everyone's like, well, what is property conveyancing? It's like, let me tell you. And so I think the moniker is not very, you know, sexy. It's not an international human rights barrister like Mr. Darcy and Richard Jennings. It's sort of cultivates work of working with homeless people, helping people retain their home, but it's incredibly interesting. It's, you know, you're dealing with legislation and statutory instruments. You are trying to use the law as the tool it is to help people enforce their rights. And that's exactly what we wanted to be doing. And so that's what we did. And because JFF is funded in a certain way, the salary was better than going through sort of paralegal training in a social welfare law firm option. And so it allowed me to do that, really. And after I qualified, I stayed at my award for 5 years, 5 amazing, wonderful years, doing that work. Now, we've spoken to protection of the sector. I have to hold my hands up. I have technically left, not in my heart, but like in reality. I've left for many reasons. So the balance of that work being really, really hard work. I can see faces in the crowd, I know who still do that work. It is
challenging, and it's only got more so. People used to come into Mary Ward, we used to run both a housing drop-in and a welfare benefits drop-in. You could turn up at the door, if you were sort of first 20 people, you would get advice on what issue then. And people would turn up with their key workers, their support workers. They were having additional assistance to deal with the other cluster issues that we know exist, their health issues, their debt issues. And that started to fall away. And you weren't just being a lawyer, you were having to be a counsellor, you were having to be a support worker, you were having to call up the council to make sure, their prescription was being delivered or whatever, just to ensure that you could also deal with their legal issue. And it became unsustainable. The vicarious trauma that we were, as practitioners, sort of experiencing, victims of trafficking, victims of sexual and domestic violence, people telling you their stories so that you can assist them with their cases, that is something that you take home with you, particularly in COVID, where you're working at home, you're hearing all this information, and there is no space, there's nowhere where you can sort of digest, move away from that. And I think that had a big impact on the sector. And so the reality became sort of juggling the balance of my home life, trying to do a nursery pickup when a client is telling me they've got nowhere to stay that night. It's really, really difficult. So I made the choice to leave, not forever, keep being asked when I'm coming back. Don't see my boss anywhere, maybe sometime. And moved into what I would call neutral territory in the civil service, not the other side, but sort of like a networking as a registrar, which is a really interesting role. It explores a lot of sort of legal research. We get sort of quasi-judicial powers to do case management orders and directions and things like that to make sure that the case, sort of, in a sense, people have access to justice in a speedier way, so that they move through the appellate tribunal and get their end result, get their decision. So that's what I do now. But in terms of, I guess I'm the past of social justice education, as an I sort of, I've been through it and I did it, and I continue to champion it because I think it's incredibly, incredibly important. And it starts really here at UCL, at universities, giving people the curiosity and the knowledge and the awareness that this career path is out there, and it's so worthwhile. And it's difficult to stay in, and you may be able to find that balance. I'm sure I'll be back, no doubt about it, because it lives in my heart. But making sure that people know about it is actually the first hurdle. And I think that the clinic, the modules, all of those things go a long way. I was a committee member of the Junior Housing Law Practitioners Association, and one of the things we did is we put on a conference for students directly. That was the demographic we were targeting. And we tried to make the title sexy. It was called Housing is a Human Right, or Human Rights Start at Home, or something like that, like to bring people in, because you get to university and housing law, I think, as I said, doesn't really draw you in as to what the work actually is. And the feedback from that was, wow, I didn't know this existed, and we had Lady Hale as a keynote speaker, so we got a lot of people through the door. But it was about sparking that curiosity and bringing awareness to the sector so that they can then continue on that journey and learn about it more, because I think it's getting people into that sort of that headspace that exists, particularly when people with big bucks are coming into universities and saying, this is the career path for you. And it's true. This career path isn't that attractive in terms of the financial remunerations, but boy, oh boy, can you sit on your high horse when you get home and be like, wow, I helped this mum and her 3 kids move somewhere safe today. They finally have a home. They're going to be there for the rest of those kids' lives, or they grow and they're safe. They are away from the person who was perpetrating abuse against them. There is nothing, I promise you, that can compare to that feeling. It's phenomenal. And so I would urge UCL to continue their amazing work. If anyone after this has any questions about this type of work, I'm also a mentor of the Young Legal Aid Lawyers mentorship scheme, which I would also urge you to join also as a mentor, not just mentees, as students, because people have questions and queries about how they can get into the sector, and it's really important we answer those. So I am the past of social justice education, but there is absolutely a future, and we really need to nurture it and champion it.
Rachel, and UCL for having me back. It's been nice to be here. And as Rachel was saying, I spent quite a long time at UCL. It was just over 9 years ago that I started that. I'm back as a volunteer receptionist. And what grabbed me, well, there's loads of things that grabbed me about work. I think there's an immediacy to it. So when you're a law student, you're mostly learning in the lecture hall or in the library, and everything's kind of we're good at one stage removed. There's a leave abstraction where you learn about the law. But at the clinic, if you're sitting in a kind of appointment, then you're kind of confronted with the law and how it interacts with reality. So I found that incredibly refreshing. There's an immediacy in the sense that clients come to the clinic and burden these issues and an emotional state perhaps, and then you see the relief that they experience in fighting in another person who they know who's on their side. And I think the importance of that can't really be overstated in an era of large language models and there's an immediacy also in the results coming in while you're at the clinic and then seeing the impact that has on people. Timmy's talked about that so clearly. That sense of satisfaction you get from work is incredible, and it's what continues to sustain me now, and I think it sustains a lot of practitioners in the sector. One of the things about working in the clinic that I started to appreciate is that you're kind of being brought into the fold in this slightly occult practice. So it's like the lawyers are teaching you how to write a particular style, or phoning up the local authority or the DWP, and reciting certain incantations. Also, we're teaching you how to do these arcane rituals, like speak at court or apply the civil procedure rules. And then abracadabra, you've made material change in the world. And that's that's pretty remarkable. I think that's something that was really exciting then, and it's still exciting now. I'm looking back as a supervisor. I saw some of the students, not all the students, but some of them certainly had similar kinds of experiences, that even if they didn't necessarily frame it in terms of sorcery. One of the reasons that I think I got such a rich experience at the clinic, and other students have done, is to do with the way that it's structured. So legal clinics at universities can be structured in different ways. Some are more student-led, others are more practitioner-led. Some will do discrete bits of advice on one basis, others will do casework. And the way that ILAC is set up so that it does casework and is practitioner-led effectively means that you have a mini law firm within the faculty of laws. I think it's really valuable because it then is allowing students to experience what it is to be in legal practice. It gives them an idea of whether or not this is something that you might want to go into. That's not easy to do, and I think it requires a lot of buy-in from the university, and it also requires a lot of money. But one of the other things that I think is really good for the experience that, ILAC provides is the legal aid contract that we're always talking about, because it's another form of funding that allows you to do, allows you to pay for expert reports or court fees, allows you to instruct counsel, and also gives clients cost protection if the action fails. They're not going to get lumbered with an adverse cost order. And that just opens up a really wide range of different kinds of work that you can do. I think a really good example of that is that clinic has recently been granted permission on judicial review, bringing a judicial review against HMRC on an issue that's affecting dozens, if not hundreds, of refugees annually. And it's just such a wealth of learning opportunities from that. So students who work on this case, they're going to get a chance to learn about the experience of being a refugee. They're also going to learn about how to build a case, how to build a piece of strategic litigation by working with different partners, by working with chambers, NGOs, they're going to learn about the legal aid system and the bureaucracy of it, and the difficulties that come with it. They'll learn about how to actually, the procedure of taking a case to court, the pre-action protocol, how to bring it from judicial review in court. And then there's the actual substantive law itself. So permission's been granted on 3 grounds, and I think 4 grounds, right, but amongst those 4 are there's a breach of the public technical duty, there's a breach of pension rights, and there's a breach of administrative law duties. So it's just that total piece. Like there's so much to learn there. I mean, it was for me when I was working. And so I imagine for students it would be the same. It's the same. And that comes from a single case that's been made possible by the clinic and the legal track. And what it means is that hopefully at some point this year, students will get to go to the Royal Courts, see a KC, make oral reps on a case that they worked on. I think that's just absolutely class. That's really, really exciting and hopefully inspirational. A lot of what we've been talking about is the reproduction of the sector. And the clinic, which is a necessary condition for access to justice, certainly, but it's not sufficient. But the clinic plays a really important role in that. I think it does offer students that come through the doors the chance to see that there's an alternative path, there's a different career that you take. And that different career is incredibly stimulating, it's challenging, and it's ultimately very rewarding.
Thank you very much.